The summer I turned 13 changed everything I thought I knew about my family, about tradition, about the price some cultures place on a young girl's future. It started with something as natural as my first period, an event that, in most American households, would warrant perhaps a quiet conversation with mom, maybe a trip to the store for supplies, and life moving forward as usual. But in my family, in our tightly knit community that had transplanted old world traditions to American soil, that first drop of blood meant something entirely different. It meant I was ready to be sold. I remember waking up that morning in our modest home in Queens, New York, feeling the unfamiliar cramping, discovering the evidence on my sheets. My first instinct was embarrassment, maybe even a little fear at this change in my body. But when my mother found me trying to wash the sheets in our small bathroom, her reaction shocked me. She began crying, but they weren't tears of sympathy or even the bittersweet tears of watching her daughter grow up. They were tears of joy, of relief, as if she'd been waiting for this moment since the day I was born. Within hours, our house transformed into something I'd never seen before. My aunts arrived one by one, each carrying covered dishes and wrapped packages, their faces glowing with excitement. The phone rang constantly as my mother spread the news through our extended family network. By afternoon, our living room overflowed with female relatives I hadn't seen in months, all speaking in rapid Arabic, all focused on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. My grandmother, a woman who rarely showed physical affection, pulled me into an embrace that felt more like capture than comfort. Her weathered hands cupped my face as she spoke words that would haunt me for years to come. She told me I had become a woman, that Allah had blessed me with the ability to fulfill my purpose, to bear children, to continue our family line. She spoke of tradition, of 400 years of women in our family who had married within the moon cycle of their first blood, keeping themselves pure, ensuring strong bloodlines, honoring the ways of our ancestors. As I sat there, surrounded by celebrating women, something clicked in my mind. I thought of my cousin Sarah, who had disappeared when she turned 14, supposedly returning to Jordan for better schooling. I thought of my other cousin, Amina, who we'd been told had moved to live with relatives in Michigan after her 13th birthday. I remembered asking about them, wondering why they never visited, never called, and being told that good girls focused on their new families, not their old ones. The patterns suddenly became clear, and the realization hit me like ice water. They hadn't moved away for school. They had been married off. The celebrating women treated me differently now, as if I'd crossed some invisible threshold from child to commodity. They examined me like livestock at market, commenting on my clear skin, my thick hair, my wide hips that would be good for childbearing. One aunt lifted my lip to check my teeth, nodding approvingly at their straightness. Another measured my waist with her hands, declaring I had the perfect proportions to attract a good husband. I wanted to scream, to run, but I sat frozen, understanding finally why my parents had been so strict about my friendships, why I wasn't allowed to join after-school activities, why every aspect of my life had been so carefully controlled. That evening, as the women prepared an elaborate meal in celebration, I heard my father's voice from his study, speaking on the phone in Arabic. Though he tried to keep his voice low, I could make out enough words to understand he was negotiating. He mentioned my age, 13. He confirmed I was healthy and untouched. He discussed amounts, haggling like he did at the halal market, except this time the product being sold was me. The buyer on the other end of that call would turn out to be a man named Mr. Rashid, 49 years old, wealthy from his printing business, and in search of his third wife. The story I'm about to share with you isn't unique to my family or even to my culture. It happens in communities across America, hidden behind closed doors, protected by silence and threats of shame. It's a story of how I almost became another disappeared girl, another child bride sacrificed to tradition, and how an unexpected alliance of women and girls saved not just me, but 7 of us in total. It's about the night we burned wedding dresses in a queen's backyard while sirens wailed in the distance, and how sometimes salvation comes from the most unlikely sources. My cousin Layla had always been different from the other women in our family. Where they moved with practiced submission, eyes downcast, voices soft, she carried herself with a defiance that made the aunts whisper behind their hands. She'd been gone for 5 years, and when she returned to attend a family gathering, the very air in the room seemed to change. I watched from my corner as conversations died mid-sentence, as women who had been laughing moments before suddenly found urgent tasks in other rooms. At dinner, while the rest of us crowded around the main table, Layla sat alone at the kitchen counter, eating in isolation like she carried some contagious disease. I was young enough then that my curiosity outweighed my training to obey without question. When I stood to bring her some of the fresh bread my mother had baked, my older sister Fatima grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks. Her warning came in a harsh whisper that spoke of consequences I didn't yet understand. She told me to stay away from that one, the one who had destroyed a good man's life with her lies. But even then, something in my sister's eyes didn't match her words. There was fear there, yes, but also something else, something that looked almost like envy. Over the months that followed my first period, as preparations for my impending marriage began in earnest, I watched Layla navigate our household like a ghost. She had returned to live with her parents after whatever had happened during her marriage, and the family treated her as both invisible and dangerous. The aunts who had once praised young women for being helpful now acted as if Layla's cooking might poison them. They would make her taste every dish first, standing over her with sneers of disgust as she took the first bite, waiting to see if she would keel over before allowing the food to be served. My mother would inspect Layla's cleaning 3, 4, sometimes 5 times, always finding invisible specks of dirt, always having another criticism ready. But I began to notice things about Layla that the adults either didn't see or chose to ignore. During large family meals, when the young girls would help serve, I caught her slipping small folded papers into teenage cousins' pockets with the swift precision of a magician. She would leave books about women's health and anatomy in the bathroom, tucked behind cleaning supplies where curious girls might find them, but adults wouldn't think to look. She memorized which days each young cousin visited and always seemed to have sanitary supplies ready in her apron pockets, distributed with subtle kindness when mothers weren't watching. The afternoon that changed the trajectory of my life came 3 days after the celebration of my first period. The negotiations for my marriage had intensified, and I could hear my father on the phone constantly, his voice rising and falling with the rhythms of bargaining. The buyer, Mr. Rashid, was apparently eager to close the deal. He had specific requirements about timing, wanting the wedding to happen within the traditional moon cycle, wanting to ensure my purity before too much time passed. The words drifted through our thin walls like poison gas, seeping into every corner of my consciousness. I was in the bathroom trying to figure out how to use the sanitary pads my mother had given me with absolutely no instruction when someone knocked softly on the door. It was Layla. She slipped inside and locked the door behind her, her movements quick and practiced. From her pocket, she produced a small flip phone, the kind drug dealers used in movies, already programmed with numbers. Her instructions came rapid fire, whispered so quietly I had to lean in to hear. She told me to go to Mrs. Ahmed at school tomorrow to say specific words that she made me repeat 3 times. Tell her you're being forced to marry a man who is 49 years old. Tell her you're 13. Tell her you need help. Mrs. Ahmed, she explained, was a mandated reporter. By law, she would have to act. Before I could ask questions, before I could even process what was happening, Layla was gone, leaving me standing there with the phone hidden in my palm, my heart racing with a mixture of hope and terror. That night, my father found the phone. I had hidden it under my mattress, thinking it would be safe there, but my mother had decided to change my sheets, wanting everything fresh and clean for when Mr. Rashid would come to meet his bride. The small device fell out as she lifted the mattress, clattering on the floor like an accusation. The rage that followed was unlike anything I had ever seen from my father. He dragged both Layla and me before my grandfather, the family patriarch whose word was absolute law in our household. My grandfather sat in his chair like a judge on a throne while my father presented the evidence of Layla's corruption, but my grandfather barely looked at us. His contempt was reserved entirely for Layla as he spoke words meant to cut deep. He said she had always been jealous of pure girls who could attract good husbands, that her failure in marriage had twisted her into something bitter and destructive. He reminded her that she should have been grateful to be chosen so young, that at 23 with her reputation, no man would touch her now. Then he turned to me, and the verdict was swift and final. My wedding would happen this weekend instead of waiting the full moon cycle. The corruption had already begun, he declared, and swift action was needed to save my honor and the family's reputation. I remember standing there feeling the floor might open up and swallow me, while Layla stared straight ahead, her face a mask of stone that couldn't quite hide the devastation in her eyes. For the next several days, I was under constant surveillance. My bedroom door was locked from the outside at night. My mother or an aunt accompanied me everywhere, even to the bathroom. School was out of the question. I was told I had a severe case of flu, too contagious to attend classes. The walls of our house, which had always felt protective, now pressed in like a prison. I could hear life continuing outside, cars passing, children playing, the normal world spinning on while mine had ground to a halt. But children have ways of communicating that adults often overlook. Our house, like many in our neighborhood, had connected heating systems, the vents carrying air and sometimes voices between rooms. Late at night, when the adults thought we were all asleep, whispers would travel through those metal passages. My younger cousins had been listening, learning, understanding more than anyone gave them credit for. Amara, only 11 years old but wise beyond her years, became our unofficial messenger, carrying words through the vents when darkness provided cover. On the second night of my imprisonment, the house erupted into chaos. I pressed my ear against my bedroom door, trying to decipher the shouting and commotion below. Through fragments of angry voices and accusations, I pieced together what had happened. Someone had discovered Layla in the tool shed at dawn, surrounded by a group of younger cousins. She had been teaching them phrases in English, simple sentences that could save their lives. Help me, I'm being forced to marry. I am 13 years old. My name is whatever your name is, and I need help. The adults had dragged her out by her hair, her voice still ringing out, telling the girls to remember the words, to practice them, to be ready to use them. The punishment was swift and brutal. By that afternoon, when I was allowed out of my room for mandatory wedding dress fittings, I saw Layla being marched through the house with her head completely shaved, her scalp raw and bleeding where the razor had been wielded carelessly or perhaps cruelly. They locked her in the storage building out back, a structure that smelled of motor oil and rusted tools, with no windows and only one door that could be barred from the outside. My aunt announced to everyone present that Layla's husband's family was coming for her tomorrow, that finally justice would be served, that she would be returned to her rightful place. 2 nights before my wedding, when the house had settled into uneasy sleep and my guard aunt was snoring in the chair by my door, I heard a soft scratching at my window. Amara had climbed the drain pipe, risking everything to reach me. She had bribed one of the younger boys with his favorite candy to steal the key to the storage building. Together, we crept through the darkness, our bare feet silent on the cold ground, hearts pounding so loud I was sure someone would hear. We found Layla curled in the corner of the storage building, her body folded in on itself like she was trying to disappear. The smell hit me first, unwashed human mixed with motor oil and fear. She didn't react when we entered, didn't even look up until I touched her shoulder gently. In the dim light filtering through cracks in the walls, I could see the damage they had done. Her scalp was worse than I'd thought, infected in places, angry red welts crossing her skull like a map of cruelty. We sat with her in silence for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Amara had brought water, which Layla drank greedily, and some bread she'd hidden in her nightgown. Finally, when the silence had stretched so long I thought it might snap, Layla spoke. Her voice was hollow, drained of the fierce energy I'd come to associate with her. She told me I had the right to know who I was marrying. She told me to ask anyone except family about Mr. Rashid's first 2 wives, ask how old they were, ask how they died. The words hung in the air between us like a physical presence. I wanted to ask more, needed to know everything, but Layla continued before I could speak. She told me she should have died too, that it would have been better than this half-life she was forced to live. That's when I finally asked the question that had burned in my mind since her return. Was Mr. Rashid the good man she had supposedly destroyed with her lies? She looked at me then, really looked at me for the first time since we'd entered that horrible place. In the darkness, her eyes seemed to glow with a pain so deep it took my breath away. She had been 12 when they married her to him. He had been 43. She was his 3rd wife. The other 2 had died before their 16th birthdays. The words came out in a monotone, like she was reciting facts from a history book, but each one landed like a physical blow. I gripped her hands then, feeling the rough scabs and fresh wounds from her punishment, understanding finally the full horror of what awaited me. My mind raced with the implications. 2 dead wives, both teenagers, and now he wanted me. Outside, a dog began barking, and we all froze. Footsteps crunched on the gravel path approaching the storage building. Amara dove behind a pile of old furniture covered in dusty tarps, her small body disappearing into the shadows. Layla shoved me toward the door, hissing at me to go, to run, to not be caught here. I stumbled out into the night just as my Uncle Mahmoud rounded the corner. He squinted at me in the darkness, suspicious but not certain of what he'd seen. I forced myself to walk normally, to breathe evenly, to look like a girl who had simply needed fresh air, not one who had just learned she was being sold to a killer. Behind me, I heard him rattling the lock on the storage building, checking that his prisoner was still contained. Back in my room, I sat at my desk and pulled out my homework from the last day I'd attended school. It seemed like a lifetime ago. On the back of my math worksheet, in handwriting so small it looked like decoration, I wrote everything. Sarah's name was at the top. She was my best friend, the one person outside my family who might notice I was gone, who might ask questions. I detailed Mr. Rashid's history, the dead wives, the plans for my marriage in 2 days. I begged her to tell someone, anyone, to help me. But morning came too soon, and with it, my mother's declaration that I would not be attending school. Wedding preparations required my presence, she said, her voice bright with false cheer. My stomach dropped as she began her search, the routine inspection that had become daily since finding the phone. She looked under the mattress, in my drawers behind my books. She found my homework with its desperate message. The blood drained from her face as she read, and for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something crack in her facade. But then she left and returned with my Aunt Rashida, and any hope I'd harbored died. From that moment on, I was never alone. Aunt Rashida moved into my room, sleeping in the bed across from mine, her snores a constant reminder of my captivity. She accompanied me to the bathroom, stood outside the shower curtain while I bathed, watched me with hawk eyes during every waking moment. The wedding preparations continued around me like I was a doll to be dressed up, not a person with thoughts and fears and dreams of my own. Through the thin walls that night, I heard my father on the phone again with Mr. Rashid. They discussed money, arguing over amounts that seemed both enormous and insultingly small for the price of a human life. Then I heard the words that made my blood freeze. Proven fertility. My first period had increased my bride price. I was worth more now that they knew for certain I could bear children. They discussed my body like a piece of property, noting measurements and health markers, calculating my value down to the dollar. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Aunt Rashida's snores filled the room, a rhythmic reminder of my guard's presence. Then, so soft I almost missed it, came a whisper through the heating vent. Amara's voice drifted through the metal passages, small but determined. She had memorized the shelter number from Layla's teachings. She promised to call from school tomorrow, promised to get help, promised not to let them sell me like they'd sold the others. I pressed my face against the vent and whispered back my thanks, told her to be careful, to protect herself. But even as hope bloomed in my chest, I knew the odds were against us. Amara was just a child, and the adults had generations of practice in maintaining their control. Still, it was something, a lifeline in an ocean of despair. Morning brought my grandmother to my room, her arms full of jewelry boxes that she laid out on my bed with the reverence of a religious ritual. As she opened each box, revealing gold chains and heavy bangles and elaborate earrings, she told me their history. This necklace had belonged to her mother, brought from the old country. These bangles had adorned 6 generations of brides. These earrings had been worn by every woman in our family on their wedding day. But I recognized them from somewhere else, too. These were the same pieces Layla wore in her wedding photos, the ones from when she was 12 years old, standing next to Mr. Rashid with eyes that already looked dead. My grandmother fastened the necklace around my throat, and it felt exactly like what it was, a collar marking me as property. She kissed my forehead and told me how beautiful I would look for Mr. Rashid, how pleased he would be with his new bride, how honored our family was by his interest. Downstairs, I heard a car arrive, expensive by the sound of the engine. Male voices filled our front room, my father's among them, all speaking in the formal Arabic reserved for important business. Mr. Rashid had come early, wanting to meet his bride before the ceremony, wanting to ensure everything was to his satisfaction. The aunts descended on me like a flock of vultures, stripping me down for the ceremonial bath despite my protests. The water was scalding hot, scented with rose oil that made my stomach turn. They scrubbed my skin with rough cloths until it was raw and pink, washing my hair 3 times while murmuring prayers over my body. I could hear him downstairs the entire time, his laugh deep and confident, the laugh of a man who always got what he wanted. They dressed me in a simple white dress, nothing fancy yet, just pure and clean for presentation. I was marched downstairs like a prisoner heading to execution, my aunts flanking me on either side. The study door was heavy wood with brass fixtures that had been polished to a shine. My grandmother knocked twice in a specific pattern, then pushed me inside. Mr. Rashid sat in my grandfather's leather chair like he already owned it, like he already owned everything in this house, including me. He was exactly as Layla had described in her broken whispers. 49 years old with silver threading through his black hair, hands that looked soft and manicured, never having done real work. He smiled when he saw me, and something in that smile made my skin crawl. Too many teeth, too much satisfaction, like a predator finally cornering its prey. My grandmother hovered by the door as he stood and approached. He asked permission to check my pulse, claiming it was for health reasons, that he needed to ensure I was strong enough for marriage and childbearing. His fingers wrapped around my wrist, pressing against the veins with practice that spoke of having done this before. He counted under his breath, nodding with satisfaction at whatever he found there. Then, still holding my wrist, he began to speak about his previous wives. He called them fragile, weak constitutions that couldn't handle the demands of married life. The first one had lasted 2 years before her body gave out. The second had barely made it to 1 year. He spoke of their deaths with the casual indifference of someone discussing broken appliances, items that had failed to meet specifications and needed replacement. He hoped, he said while squeezing my wrist just hard enough to hurt, that I would prove more durable. That's when the scream pierced the air outside. Layla's scream, raw and desperate and final. I jerked toward the window and saw them in the courtyard below. Her relatives had arrived as promised, come to collect their wayward daughter and return her to her rightful place. They were dragging her toward a van, her uncle gripping her arms while her aunt pulled her by the remnants of her shaved hair. Her feet scraped against the concrete as she fought with everything she had left, which wasn't much after days of starvation and abuse. I lunged for the door, my body moving before my mind could stop it, but Mr. Rashid was faster. His soft hands were stronger than they looked as he blocked the exit with his body. His smile never wavered as he leaned close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and cloying that would forever after make me nauseous. He whispered that if I behaved, he would be gentler with me than he'd been with Layla. She had fought too much, made things difficult for everyone, but I seemed smarter than that. I seemed like a girl who understood her place. My grandmother shifted uncomfortably by the door, and I saw something in her face I'd never seen before. Doubt. Just a flicker, just a moment, but it was there. Even she looked unsettled by his words, by the casual way he discussed being gentle or not, by the implications that hung in the air like smoke. But before she could speak, before that doubt could solidify into action, another commotion erupted in the house. Aunt Rashida's voice rose in panic from upstairs. Amara was missing from Quran's study. The other girls said she'd excused herself for the bathroom 20 minutes ago and never returned. The house exploded into chaos as adults ran through rooms calling her name, checking closets and cupboards, searching the yard. Mr. Rashid stepped aside to let my grandmother rush out, but his eyes never left me. We stood there in the study, him blocking the only exit, listening to the panic spreading through the house like wildfire. 20 minutes later, the phone rang. The school administrator's voice was carefully neutral as she explained that Amara had shown up at the office telling wild stories about forced marriages and child brides in our family. Of course, the administrator assured my grandfather she understood these were just the fantasies of an over-imaginative child. She would send Amara home immediately for the family to handle this internal matter. No need to involve outside authorities over a child's storytelling. When Amara arrived, flanked by 2 male cousins who had been sent to retrieve her, my grandfather's rage shook the walls. I could hear it from the study where Mr. Rashid still held me captive with his presence. The shouting, the sound of impact, Amara's cries. He ordered all young girls locked in their rooms immediately. No exceptions, no bathroom breaks without supervision, no communication between them. The house would be in lockdown until after my wedding. Through the study door, which had been left slightly ajar in the chaos, I caught fragments of conversation between Mr. Rashid and my father. They discussed damage control, how to handle the situation if questions arose. Mr. Rashid spoke with the confidence of experience. He told my father about Layla's attempts years ago, how she'd tried to spread lies about their marriage, how he'd handled the situation with the help of understanding authorities who knew not to interfere in cultural matters. He assured my father that he had connections, people who understood that some communities handled things differently, traditionally. Any investigation could be managed. Then came a knock at our front door that would change everything. Sarah's mother stood on our porch, still wearing her nursing scrubs from the hospital. Sarah had noticed my absence from school, had been worried when I didn't answer texts or calls. Her mother, trained to spot signs of abuse in her work, insisted on seeing me. She pushed past my mother's polite refusals, her voice growing louder as she demanded to know where I was. The family tried every excuse. I was sick, I was sleeping, I was at a relative's house. But Sarah's mother wouldn't budge. She threatened to call the police if she didn't see me in the next 5 minutes. Then, perhaps recognizing she needed a different approach, she suggested that maybe I was pregnant. Maybe that's why the family was hiding me. The accusation of dishonor made my grandfather's face turn purple with rage, but it also backed him into a corner. To prove I wasn't pregnant, To protect the family's reputation, he agreed to let her take me for a medical exam. In her car, Sarah's mother gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles. She didn't speak at first, just drove while I sat in the passenger seat, trying to process this sudden, unexpected freedom. Finally, at a red light, she turned to me. Sarah had told her everything she knew, had shown her the desperate message I'd written on my homework. But a clinic visit was all she could offer. She had 3 daughters of her own to protect, bills to pay, a job she couldn't afford to lose by getting too involved in cultural disputes. She would do what she could, but she couldn't save me. I would have to save myself. The clinic smelled like disinfectant and floor wax, a sharp contrast to the rose oil and incense that had permeated my world for days. In the waiting room, I watched other patients avoiding eye contact, each lost in their own troubles. Sarah's mother filled out paperwork, listing vague symptoms that would justify a full examination. My hands shook as I gripped the plastic chair arms, knowing this might be my only chance to create evidence of what was happening to me. The nurse who called my name was professionally kind, the type who'd seen everything and maintained compassion despite it. In the examination room, I pulled up my sleeves to show the bruises from where my father had gripped me, where Mr. Rashid had held my wrist. I begged her to document everything, to take photographs, to create a record that couldn't be dismissed as a child's imagination. She did as I asked, her face carefully neutral, explaining as she worked that documentation meant nothing without my willingness to make a formal report. Without that, I would simply be returned to my family. The system, she said with genuine regret, was designed to keep families together, not to protect children from those families. Then a young male nurse entered to help with vitals, and everything changed. He froze when he heard my last name, his eyes widening with recognition. He knew the Rashid family, knew them well, in fact. While the female nurse stepped out to get supplies, he leaned close and whispered urgently. His sister had been Mr. Rashid's first wife. She died at 15, supposedly from pregnancy complications. But he'd seen her body before the burial, had seen the bruises, the evidence of internal damage that had nothing to do with pregnancy. His family had been threatened into silence, told that accusations would only bring shame on his dead sister's memory. He scribbled his phone number on a tissue and pressed it into my palm, telling me his mother had evidence she'd been saving for years, waiting for someone brave enough to use it. Then the female nurse returned, and he resumed his professional demeanor as if nothing had happened. But I clutched that tissue like a lifeline, the first real proof that Layla's warnings were true, that Mr. Rashid was exactly the monster she'd described. Sarah's mother had to return me home. As much as she wanted to help, she couldn't kidnap me, couldn't risk her own family's stability for mine. The drive back felt like traveling to my own funeral, each familiar street bringing me closer to a fate that now seemed inevitable. She squeezed my hand before I got out of the car, her eyes full of helpless sympathy and guilt. She promised to keep checking on me, to do what she could, but we both knew it wouldn't be enough. The house was in chaos when I returned. My grandfather had summoned the family doctor, a man who'd been taking bribes from our community for decades to look the other way, to perform examinations that would never be questioned, to sign documents that said whatever the family needed them to say. The examination would happen immediately, my grandfather declared, to prove my purity for Mr. Rashid and to put to rest any doubts created by my unauthorized clinic visit. Female relatives surrounded me in my bedroom, holding my arms and legs while the doctor performed his shameful task. I thrashed and screamed, remembering Layla's English phrases and shouting them over and over. "Help me! I'm being forced to marry. I am 13 years old." The words bounced off the walls and fell on deaf ears. When it was over, when I lay there feeling violated and defeated, the doctor pronounced me pure and suitable for marriage. He would provide written documentation for Mr. Rashid's satisfaction. That night, locked in my room with Aunt Rashida snoring across from me, I heard whispers through the heating vents. Amara's voice, despite the beating she'd received, was teaching the shelter numbers to our younger cousins. The little ones were memorizing the digits, passing them between rooms through the connected air ducts, creating a network of small voices preparing for rebellion. 7-year-old Yasmin repeated the numbers in a sing-song voice. 9-year-old Hannah whispered them like a prayer. They were getting ready for something, though none of us knew what. Morning arrived with Mr. Rashid at our door again, earlier than ever. He claimed he needed to calm his bride before the ceremony, to ensure I understood my duties as a wife, to go over the marriage contracts so there would be no surprises. My grandfather hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with these repeated private meetings, but my father insisted. Tradition demanded that the groom be satisfied, that all his concerns be addressed. The wedding was tomorrow, and nothing could be allowed to interfere. Even my grandmother seemed troubled by Mr. Rashid's eagerness. As they led me once again to the study, she lingered in the hallway, her prayer beads clicking faster than I'd ever heard them. Her weathered face showed conflict, tradition warring with some deeper instinct that recognized danger. But she said nothing, did nothing, just watched as they shut me in with him again. This time, Mr. Rashid didn't bother with pretense. He sat behind the desk and described in horrifying detail exactly what had happened to Layla during their marriage. He told me about their wedding night, how she'd fought him, how he'd had to teach her submission. He described the methods he'd used to break her spirit, the punishments that awaited wives who resisted their husband's authority. His soft hands gestured casually as he outlined horrors that made my stomach churn and my skin crawl with revulsion. He explained that his first wife had been a fighter too, had resisted until the very end. That's why she'd only lasted 2 years. The second had learned from the first example, had been more compliant, but her body had been weak. He hoped I would be smarter than both of them, that I would understand my place and submit willingly. It would be so much easier for everyone if I simply accepted my fate. He could be kind to obedient wives. He had no desire to hurt me if I didn't force him to. The casual evil of his words, the matter-of-fact way he discussed hurting children, broke something inside me. That night, in desperation, I used the edge of my bed frame to scratch the shelter number into my forearm. The pain was sharp and clarifying, each digit carved into my skin a promise that even if I died, someone might see, might understand, might stop this from happening to another girl. Blood welled in the shallow cuts, and I pressed tissue against them to stop the bleeding while Aunt Rashida snored, oblivious. Through the vents came the sound of my cousin network, still whispering, still practicing. Their small voices drifted through the walls like ghostly preparation for a battle they were too young to understand. Downstairs, the adults prepared for the wedding feast, cooking elaborate dishes, arranging flowers, acting like tomorrow would be a celebration instead of a funeral for my childhood. A package arrived the next morning, delivered by courier with instructions that it be given directly to me. Inside was a gold bracelet, heavy and ornate. Engraved on its surface were 2 names in Arabic script. Mr. Rashid's previous wives, a blank space waited for my name to be added, a sick trophy for his collection. My mother found me trying to break my bedroom window with the jewelry box the bracelet had come in. The heavy wood had cracked the glass, but not shattered it, leaving spiderweb fractures that distorted the view of the world outside. She called me ungrateful, selfish, accused me of trying to destroy our family's honor for my own childish fears. Didn't I understand what this marriage meant for our family? The debts it would pay, the connections it would bring, the honor of being chosen by such an established man? She raged at me while picking up the scattered jewelry, while checking the window for damage that would need to be hidden before guests arrived. But underneath her anger, I thought I detected something else. Fear, perhaps. Or maybe just the brittle sound of a woman trying to convince herself that sacrificing her daughter was justified. Then salvation arrived in an unexpected form. Sarah and her mother appeared at our door, ostensibly to help with wedding preparations. My mother couldn't refuse their assistance without causing offense. And Sarah's mother was clever enough to bring her nursing bag, claiming she wanted to check on me after yesterday's clinic visit. Hidden in that bag, wrapped in medical supplies, was a burner phone. The male nurse from the clinic had contacted them, had given them his mother's information. The woman wanted to meet me, had evidence about her daughter's death that she'd been saving for years, waiting for someone who might be able to use it. Aunt Rashida caught me with the phone almost immediately, but Sarah's mother smoothly claimed it was hers, dropped from her bag while adjusting my wedding dress for fitting. The lie was transparent, but before Aunt Rashida could challenge it, commotion erupted downstairs. Amara had convinced her guard to let the younger cousins use the bathroom together, claiming several of them needed to go urgently. Now all 6 of them had barricaded themselves inside, pushing the heavy cabinet against the door, refusing to come out despite adult demands and threats. While the adults pounded on the bathroom door, while they shouted threats and promises in alternating waves, I managed to dial the number on the phone. The male nurse answered immediately, as if he'd been waiting by his phone. His mother would come to the wedding tomorrow, he promised. She would bring the evidence she'd been protecting for years. Photographs of her daughter's body before burial, medical records that had been hidden, proof of what Mr. Rashid did to his young wives. She had been waiting for this moment, for another girl in danger, for a chance to get justice for her daughter. The bathroom rebellion ended with violence. My grandfather, enraged by this unprecedented defiance, dragged Amara out when they finally broke down the door. He beat her in the courtyard where everyone could see, making an example of what happened to girls who defied their elders. Her screams carried through the house, each cry strengthening something inside me. If this was what happened for locking a door, what would happen to a wife who defied her husband? But more importantly, if an 11-year-old could be this brave, how could I be less? Mr. Rashid arrived during the chaos, eager to help restore order. He volunteered to discipline the younger girls himself, to teach them proper respect for authority. The enthusiasm in his voice, the eager way he offered to hurt children, finally made some of the adults exchange worried glances. For the first time, cracks appeared in their unified front. Doubt crept across faces that had been certain of the rightness of this arrangement. Even some of the uncles looked uncomfortable with his obvious pleasure at the prospect of punishment. Sarah's mother tended to Amara's injuries in the kitchen, making sure to do so where other women could see. The welts on the child's back were severe, the bruises already purple and swollen. She didn't hide them, didn't try to minimize what had been done. Several aunts turned away from the sight, unable to reconcile the violence with their image of maintaining family honor. Others stared, something shifting in their expressions as they watched this brave child bear the consequences of defiance. A younger uncle, one who had daughters of his own approaching dangerous ages, suggested postponing the wedding. There had been too much chaos, too many disruptions. Perhaps it would be better to wait until things calmed down. But my grandfather's pride wouldn't allow it. The contracts were signed, the bride price paid, arrangements made. To postpone now would be to admit weakness, to suggest that their family couldn't control their women. The wedding would proceed as planned. Mr. Rashid insisted on one more private meeting with me to calm the situation. My family reluctantly agreed, hoping his influence would settle things. In the study again, he dropped all pretense of kindness. He described in graphic detail what had happened to Layla on their wedding night, how she had fought and screamed and begged, how he had needed to teach her that wives don't refuse their husbands, how much easier things would have been if she had simply submitted. The violence in his words was casual, matter-of-fact, as if he were describing training a disobedient dog rather than torturing a child. My visible terror at his words was witnessed by my cousin Fatima through the cracked door. She had been bringing tea and saw my face, saw the fear that must have been written there in capital letters. Something in my expression made her question everything she'd been taught about marriage and duty and tradition. She had grown up with the same stories, the same expectations, but seeing my terror made her realize that perhaps those stories were lies designed to make girls comply with their own destruction. That realization led Fatima to do something unprecedented. She texted her boyfriend about what was happening, breaking the cardinal rule about keeping family business private. He shared the information with his family, who knew Mr. Rashid by reputation. Within hours, 3 women from the neighborhood appeared at our door. They were mothers whose daughters had been approached by Mr. Rashid at various community events. He had made offers for their daughters too, had been turned down, but had continued to pursue them. They came to warn my family about his reputation, about the pattern they had noticed. My grandfather dismissed them as jealous gossips, women who were bitter that their daughters hadn't been chosen. But several aunts listened from the kitchen doorway, and the stories were too similar to ignore. Each woman described the same approach, the same offers, the same persistence even after being refused. The same focus on very young girls, always those who had just begun menstruating. The pattern was becoming undeniable to anyone willing to see it. Mr. Rashid's mask slipped completely when he realized the women were sharing information about him. He raged at them, called them liars and gossips, threatened their families' reputations and businesses. But his anger only confirmed their stories. The more he protested, the more guilty he appeared. More relatives began to notice what they had been willfully blind to before. The way he looked at the younger cousins, the eager way he offered to discipline children, the specific nature of his requirements for a bride. Then the male nurse's mother arrived, clutching a worn manila envelope to her chest like a shield. Inside were photographs that would haunt me forever. Her daughter's body before the rushed burial that had hidden the evidence. The bruises, the damage, the clear signs of sustained abuse that had nothing to do with pregnancy complications. She had been 15 when she died, 15 and pregnant, with injuries no child should ever suffer. She confronted Mr. Rashid directly, there in front of everyone, her voice steady despite years of enforced silence. My grandmother saw the photographs. She recognized the jewelry in them, the same pieces Mr. Rashid had reclaimed after his wife's death, the same pieces that now sat in my room waiting to adorn another child bride. Her face went gray as the full realization hit her. This wasn't tradition being upheld. This was a serial predator being enabled by their compliance. For the first time in my life, I saw my grandmother question the system she had spent her entire life defending. Two of my aunts declared they would not participate in the wedding. They would not be part of sending another girl to such a fate. The family began fracturing along lines that had never existed before, between those who clung to tradition regardless of consequence and those whose consciences finally outweighed their conditioning. Arguments erupted in every corner of the house as relatives chose sides in a battle between protecting children and protecting reputation. Mr. Rashid, seeing his plans unraveling, switched tactics from charm to threats. He knew their secrets, he reminded them. He knew which uncles cheated on their taxes, which cousins had businesses that wouldn't bear close scrutiny, which family members had immigration issues that could be exploited. He had connections in the community, in law enforcement, in immigration. If the wedding didn't proceed, he would destroy them all socially and financially. The bride price had already been spent on family debts. They couldn't return money they no longer had. That's when my teenage male cousin did something that stunned everyone into silence. He walked into the room carrying an envelope thick with cash. His savings from 3 years of working construction, every penny he'd scraped together for his own future. He placed it on the table between my father and Mr. Rashid. It was enough to cover the bride price, enough to buy my freedom if the family was willing to sell it back. The sacrifice of it, the pure intention behind the gesture, shamed several relatives into reconsidering their positions. Then Fatima revealed what she'd been hiding. She had been recording Mr. Rashid's threats on her phone, hidden in the hallway during his morning visit. She played the recording for everyone to hear. His voice filled the room, describing in his own words what he would do to me if I resisted, comparing it to what he'd done to previous wives. The specific, horrible promises he made thinking he was speaking privately shocked even the most traditional aunts. This wasn't about marriage or tradition. This was about violence and control and the systematic destruction of young girls. My uncle suggested a compromise, trying to find middle ground that would save face for everyone. Delay the wedding until I turned 16. Give everyone time to calm down, to restore family harmony. But Mr. Rashid exploded at the suggestion. He grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks, shaking me as he demanded his rights as a groom. The mask was completely gone now, the predator fully revealed. He shouted about contracts and tradition and his rights, spittle flying from his mouth as his carefully maintained composure finally cracked completely. It was my grandfather who shocked everyone by backing down first. Seeing Mr. Rashid grab me, seeing the violence barely contained beneath the surface, finally made him recognize what he'd been enabling, but pride prevented him from admitting his mistake directly. Instead, my grandmother stepped forward. Using her position as the eldest woman in the family, she declared the wedding postponed indefinitely for the sake of family harmony. Her word carried weight that even my grandfather couldn't dismiss without causing a different kind of shame. Mr. Rashid stormed out, threatening legal action for breach of contract, promising to ruin every member of our family. His parting words were a litany of threats that only confirmed the wisdom of stopping the wedding. But I knew this wasn't over. Men like him didn't give up easily, especially when they'd been publicly humiliated. He would return, would find another way to get what he wanted. The reprieve was temporary unless we found a permanent solution. Sarah's mother used the chaos of Mr. Rashid's departure to connect me with an underground network she'd been researching since our clinic visit. There were women who specialized in helping child brides escape, who had safe houses and legal resources and connections to law enforcement officers who understood cultural crimes. They could move me tomorrow morning during the men's Friday prayer time when surveillance would be lightest. I memorized every detail of the plan, hope blooming in my chest for the first time in days. During dinner, as the family tried to pretend normalcy while processing the day's upheaval, a sympathetic aunt created a diversion. She knocked over an oil lamp, creating a small but dramatic fire that had everyone rushing for water and fire extinguishers. In the chaos, I ran to Layla's room, knowing she had hidden evidence there that might help build a legal case. I found papers hidden behind loose floorboards, documents she'd been collecting about forced marriages in our community, statistics and legal precedents, and contact information for advocacy groups. But the victory was short-lived. Under pressure from her father, who threatened to withdraw all financial support for her education, Fatima deleted the recording of Mr. Rashid's threats. The evidence vanished with a single touch of her phone screen. I watched it happen, watched her face crumble as she betrayed everything she'd started to believe in, choosing her own future over mine. I couldn't blame her. The system was designed to make us complicit in our own oppression. Mr. Rashid returned that evening with new ammunition. He carried official-looking documents, medical forms declaring me mentally unstable and in need of immediate intervention. The doctor's signature was one I didn't recognize, likely bought and paid for like so many others in our community. He demanded immediate marriage to protect me from myself, to save the family from the shame of having a mentally ill daughter. The twisted logic of it, using fake concern for my well-being to justify owning me, was perfectly calculated. My grandfather, his pride stinging from the earlier confrontation, sided with Mr. Rashid. Family honor had been damaged by the day's events. The only way to restore it was to proceed with the wedding immediately, tonight. No more delays, no more disruptions. The women who had protested found themselves locked in their rooms, their voices silenced by keys turning in locks. The resistance crumbled under patriarchal authority reasserting itself with desperate violence. I stood in my room while aunts forced me into the white wedding dress, their hands rough with urgency. Downstairs, I could hear Mr. Rashid's voice mixing with the male relatives as they prepared for the ceremony. The window with its spiderweb cracks mocked me, showing freedom just out of reach. But then, through the heating vent, came 3 taps, our established signal. Amara needed me, was calling for me, despite her own injuries from the beating. The locked door clicked open. Amara stood there with a bent hairpin in her hand, her face swollen from the beating but her eyes fierce with determination. Layla had taught her to pick locks during those dawn sessions in the tool shed, had known this skill might save lives. We crept through darkened hallways, avoiding the creaking floorboards I'd memorized over years of living here. The back garden door was so close, freedom just steps away, when we found Mr. Rashid blocking the path. He had anticipated this, had positioned himself and his brothers at every exit. The trap was complete, and his smile as he looked at us was the satisfied expression of a hunter who'd cornered his prey. He reached for me, and I knew with absolute certainty that if he touched me now, if he dragged me to that ceremony, I would never escape. I would become another name engraved on a gold bracelet, another dead wife blamed for her own murder. But then, car headlights flooded the courtyard, multiple vehicles arriving at once. The male nurse had made good on his promise, arriving with police officers he'd carefully selected, ones who understood cultural crimes and wouldn't be easily dismissed. Sarah's mother had called them during the fire chaos, reporting a medical emergency requiring immediate intervention. As a healthcare provider, the nurse insisted I was his patient experiencing a mental health crisis that required immediate hospitalization. My grandfather tried to refuse entry, standing in the doorway like a guardian of tradition. But the nurse pushed forward with official documentation, with papers that looked far more legitimate than Mr. Rashid's forgeries. The police officers flanked him, their presence making it clear that this wasn't a request. I stood at a crossroads in that moment, surrounded by family and strangers, tradition and law enforcement, the past and a possible future. I could stay silent and be returned to the wedding that waited in our living room. Or I could speak the truth in front of everyone, could shatter the silence that protected predators and enabled abuse. The choice was mine, but really, there was no choice at all. I pulled up the sleeves of my wedding dress, revealing the bruises from Mr. Rashid's grip, the older marks from my father's rage. Below them, carved into my skin and raised red welts, was the shelter number. Self-harm as evidence, desperation made visible for anyone who cared to look. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, from behind locked doors, came pounding. The aunts who'd been imprisoned began beating on their doors, their muffled shouts growing louder. Other cousins joined them, and soon the house echoed with the sound of fists on wood, voices demanding release. Someone, I never learned who, began unlocking doors. Maybe it was my grandmother, finally choosing children over a tradition. Maybe it was an uncle who couldn't stand to see another girl sacrificed. The doors opened, and girls poured out like water breaking through a dam. They surrounded me in a protective circle, my young cousins who'd been practicing escape phrases, who'd been preparing for this moment without fully understanding it. They began chanting in unison, their small voices filling the courtyard with the English words Layla had taught them. Help us, we are being forced to marry, we are children, we need help. The power of their combined voices, the undeniable clarity of children speaking truth, changed the very air around us. Mr. Rashid made his final, fatal mistake. Seeing his plans crumbling, he grabbed Amara as leverage, lifting the already injured child by her bruised arm. Her cry of pain was sharp and terrible, the sound of a child pushed beyond endurance. That's when my grandmother's cane struck his knee with surprising force. She stood between him and Amara, fury replacing her usual calm dignity. Even she had limits, and hurting the babies crossed them all. What followed was unlike anything I'd ever witnessed in our carefully controlled household. The dam of female rage finally broke completely. Women who'd spent lifetimes being silenced, who'd been taught their only value was obedience, found their voices in screams of fury. They came at Mr. Rashid with whatever they could grab from the kitchen, wooden spoons and rolling pins, and their bare hands. He fled toward his car as decades of suppressed anger found its target, his brothers abandoning their posts to run after him, terrified by the transformation of submissive women into avenging furies. My grandfather's authority crumbled as even his wife turned against him. She stood with the other women, her cane raised like a weapon, her face showing a lifetime of complicity transforming into active resistance. The patriarchal structure that had ruled our family for generations, that had sacrificed countless girls to preserve itself, fell apart in a matter of minutes. Not from outside pressure, but from the women within, finally saying enough. Sarah's mother guided me and the other girls toward waiting vehicles. The underground network had sent multiple vans, understanding somehow that one girl's escape might become many. As we climbed inside, I looked back to see my aunts building a bonfire in the courtyard. They threw my wedding dress onto the flames first, then the marriage contracts, then all the jewelry that had adorned dead brides. The fire reached toward the night sky like a beacon, visible for blocks, announcing to the neighborhood that something fundamental had changed. More girls climbed into the vans. Cousins who'd heard Amara's whispered lessons through heating vents, sisters who'd watched others disappear and understood their own fates, young women who'd been told their only value was in submission, finding the courage to seek something more. We held each other as the vehicles pulled away, leaving behind the only world we'd ever known, but which had never truly been ours. Through the back window, I watched the fire grow. The aunts fed it with years of accumulated wedding preparations. Dresses saved for daughters, contracts signed for sisters, photographs of child brides trying to smile on their wedding days. The flames consumed it all while my grandmother stood guard, ensuring no man dared interfere with this exorcism of tradition. The smoke rose into the night sky, carrying with it the ashes of expectations that had imprisoned generations. We drove through empty streets toward safe houses and new beginnings. Amara curled against my side, her breathing finally steady after days of terror and pain. The other girls whispered among themselves, mixing English phrases with our mother tongue, already planning futures that didn't include being sold to the highest bidder. My phone, hidden by Sarah's mother during the chaos, buzzed with a message. The male nurse had connected me with a lawyer who specialized in cases like ours, who would work pro bono to ensure Mr. Rashid faced justice. The safe house coordinator met us with blankets and hot tea, her face showing she'd seen this before, but never quite like this. 7 girls escaping together, an entire family structure collapsing in a single night. She assigned us rooms, explained the rules, promised that here we could be children for however long we needed. That night, lying in a bed I'd chosen in a room I could lock from the inside, I traced the scars on my arm. The shelter number had served its purpose, had been seen by those who needed to see it. Around me, other girls slept peacefully for the first time in months or maybe years. We'd learned that freedom required not just individual escape, but collective resistance, that our strength multiplied when we stood together. The story of our escape would spread through whispered networks, through heating vents and bathroom stalls and quiet conversations between women who'd been taught to compete but were learning to conspire. Other girls would hear that 7 of us got out, that the aunts finally fought back, that even grandmothers could choose children over tradition when pushed far enough. They would know escape was possible, that they weren't alone, that somewhere girls who understood were working to end this practice one rescue at a time. I closed my eyes and made a promise to myself and to Layla, wherever her relatives had taken her. I would study law and use it as a weapon against those who preyed on children. I would make sure no more girls disappeared into arranged marriages, their childhoods sold for bride prices and family honor. And someday I would find Layla and tell her that her sacrifice had saved us all, that the seeds of resistance she'd planted had grown into a garden of freedom. 6 months passed like a fever dream of lawyers and courtrooms and testimony. I sat in the witness chair, no longer the terrified 13-year-old who'd carved numbers into her skin, but someone harder and clearer, forged by survival into something unbreakable. Mr. Rashid sat at the defense table in his expensive suit, but the power he'd wielded through fear and tradition had evaporated. He was just a middle-aged predator, finally facing consequences for decades of destruction. I testified about everything, the negotiations that had reduced me to a price, the private meetings where he'd described torturing previous wives, the examination demands that had violated me before he could. My voice stayed level as I showed the judge the faded scars on my arm, evidence of desperation that had become evidence for prosecution. Other witnesses followed. Sarah's mother with her medical documentation, the male nurse's mother with photographs that made jurors weep, grandmother herself choosing justice over family loyalty, describing the jewelry worn by dead girls. The prosecution presented financial records showing Mr. Rashid's pattern, life insurance policies on teenage wives, payouts after their deaths, money used to pursue new victims. The defense tried painting me as mentally unstable, but their own expert witnesses crumbled under cross-examination. The doctor who'd signed the false documents admitted he'd never met me, that his signature had been forged. Another charge added to the growing list. Amara testified via video link, her courage at 12 years old humbling everyone who heard her. Other girls who'd escaped that night provided statements. The Safe House coordinator presented statistics showing how our escape had inspired others. 12 more girls saved in the following months as word spread that resistance was possible. Even some uncles testified, shamefaced, about ignoring warning signs for financial gain. The system that had protected predators for generations was finally being exposed in all its calculated cruelty. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours, guilty on all counts. 25 years minimum sentence. As they led Mr. Rashid away, he looked at me once with pure hatred for destroying his carefully constructed world. I stared back steadily, letting him see that his victim had become his vanquisher. Outside the courthouse, my grandmother waited with something in her weathered hands. Her own wedding ring, pressed into my palm with instructions to sell it, to use the money for education. Her way of making amends for generations of complicity. Now I live with Sarah's family, attending high school with normal teenage concerns like homework and college applications. Amara thrives with a foster family 2 hours away, and we text constantly, trauma sisters bound by survival. 5 of the 7 girls who escaped that night have found stable homes, 2 aged out and live independently, working and attending community college. We maintain our connection through encrypted apps, planning futures that once seemed impossible. The Underground Network has helped me become an advocate, speaking at safe houses and community centers. Not for fame or recognition, but in quiet rooms where my words might save lives. My family fractured completely after that night. Father faces his own legal troubles. Mother divorced him and lives with a sister who supported our escape. Some relatives have questioned other harmful traditions, small changes rippling outward like stones thrown in still water. Mr. Rashid's assets were liquidated in civil suits, compensation going to victims' families. Local mosques started premarital counseling emphasizing consent and partnership. Progress happened slowly, measured in protected childhoods and questioned traditions. The male nurse's family has become my chosen family, his mother sharing stories of her daughter while we work together to prevent more tragedies. My 18th birthday brought acceptance letters from 3 universities, all offering full scholarships for pre-law programs. I chose the one with the strongest record of social justice advocacy. The 7 of us who escaped have become symbols in our community, proof that cycles can be broken, that courage is contagious, that freedom is possible even when it seems impossibly distant. Sometimes I receive anonymous letters with legal advice for helping trapped girls. The handwriting is Layla's, her knowledge evident in every carefully researched detail. She's out there still fighting in her own way, and someday I'll find her and thank her for teaching us that our voices matter, that our lives have value beyond what others assign to us. Until then, I study hard and speak truth and help other girls find their way to freedom, one saved childhood at a time. The fire we lit that night still burns in all of us, transforming trauma into purpose, silence into testimony, victims into warriors. We are proof that tradition can be questioned, that culture evolves, that protecting children matters more than protecting reputation. And somewhere tonight, a girl is remembering the story of 7 who escaped, and she's planning her own liberation, knowing she's not alone, knowing that freedom is possible, knowing that we'll be waiting to help her when she's ready to run.